Swanee, God has smiled on the Gators, no question about it.
Hey Gator fans, so the 2026 football season is coming upon us pretty soon. We have a few days left in June and we're going to head into July, and August will be the final month of the calendar year where we won't have Florida Gator football. Well, at least in between, spring camp and the spring game and the football season itself. And what I'm doing in this video is that I'm ranking games that I think could be potentially the most difficult, on paper, based off of where the schedule is currently constructed and where the projections are for Florida and their opponents. I'm doing a ranking of what I think are on paper the hardest games of the season, from 12, meaning the softest, to number 1 being the hardest. So we're going to start that right here. Florida has Florida Atlantic to start off the season, then Campbell, then they're on the road at Auburn, then they're at home for Ole Miss, on the road at Missouri, at home for South Carolina, on the road for Texas. They get a bye week. Neutral site game against Georgia, at home for Oklahoma, on the road at Kentucky, at home against Vanderbilt, and then they finish off their season on the road at Florida State. So to go from 12 to 1, which is softest to hardest, 12 Campbell, I think it's kind of like this year's equivalent of LIU, and the fact that they play a game before Campbell, which means they'll have a week to put their their playbooks into function before they even play Campbell. That just makes it's obvious that Campbell's going to be at number 12. At number 11, it's the opening debut of the season and the opening debut for John Summerall, the John Summerall regime and his staff. The last time Florida had an in-state opponent, that was lower level of Group of 5. It did not go well at all with South Florida. I find it hard to believe John Summerall would even allow history to repeat itself in his debut as the tenure of the team. Number 10, kind of controversial, but I put Florida State here. I mean, far be it for me to take a shot at Florida State, but with all the pessimism that's surrounding the program, the speculation about when Mark Norvell will be fired instead of if he will be fired, it's kind of hard to believe that Florida State would, at that end of the season, will have a lot of fight left in them by the time the season is done. We've seen Florida State quit on Mark Norvell several times throughout the last 2 seasons, practically the second half of 2024, and then we see them quit multiple times throughout in the 2025 season. I think the Stanford game, they didn't really show much fight. The Clemson game, they didn't show much fight. NC State, they just kind of folded it in towards the end. And then the Florida game, I don't think they ever really truly showed up for that game as well. You can kind of tell that game meant more to Florida than it did to the Florida State Seminoles. So with all this speculation and negativity surrounding Florida State and the program, by the time Black Friday shows up, because that's when the game will be played, it will be very hard for me to believe that Florida State players will even buy into trying to send Mark Norvell out on a winning spectrum if he is still the head coach by the time that game is there. So I put that game at number 10. 9, Vanderbilt. Clark Lee, while he hasn't done a bad job at Vanderbilt, especially by Vanderbilt standards, he hasn't done anything pre-Diego Pavia. He got a couple of nice wins here and there during his time in his first year at Vanderbilt, but 5-7, and I think Vanderbilt was 3-9 or 2-10 in 2023 in his second year, and then obviously Diego Pavia came along and helped change the perception of Vanderbilt during those seasons. So it's hard to really take Vanderbilt too seriously because I think it's mainly Diego Pavia, and they don't recruit at the level that the best teams in the nation do, typically year in and year out. Not every coach is Kirk Cignetti with what he did in Indiana, and Clark Lee has not proven himself before Diego Pavia. So I put Vanderbilt at 9. I don't know what to expect from Vanderbilt this year, but my hopes are not high. South Carolina, Shane Beamer is up and down throughout his time in Columbia, whether winning record and then losing record and then a winning record and then a losing record. And he's had the talent. He's got some very good football players, Lenore Sellers, and a very good D lineman, and some nice skill players on the offensive side of the ball for South Carolina. I know he made a change at the offensive coordinator position, hiring Kendall Briles. We'll see what big of an impact that could have for the Gamecocks. But, I put this game at 8 because if you compare this matchup with South Carolina to the rest of the schedule, I can't really see myself putting them in the top 7 or in the top 6. They'll be on the road in Gainesville for the first time since 2022, which was the senior day in which Florida blew them out 38-6. And then it'll be the first time that South Carolina and Florida will have played each other since 2023 because of the way that the SEC has expanded and the way they're doing their schedule model. Florida and South Carolina did not see each other for a couple of years. But in this 3-6-6 model, they'll see each other every year for the next 4 years. 2 at the Swamp, 2 at William Bryce Stadium. And I think there's some Florida fans that could be excited about having South Carolina back for the first time, and I think that would be a nice energy with the team. It's homecoming week, so that could play a part into it as well. And South Carolina, if you look at their schedule, they're coming off of tough games against Alabama and having to play on the road at Kentucky with a new head coach. Florida could be easy pickings for them, but also Florida's coming off of the game against coming off of Mizzou and Ole Miss and Auburn, so Florida could be easy pickings for South Carolina as well. But I think when you look at the schedule and you look at where would you rank South Carolina in terms of toughness for Florida, I wouldn't put them in the top half. I put them at number 8. Number 7, this to me is the most unpredictable opponent of Florida's entire schedule because 13 years Kentucky had Mark Stoops in Lexington, and they had him at the control, and they had him putting his message and his philosophy and how he builds a football roster heading into whatever season that he was coaching in. And now they're changing it with a guy from Will Stein, who was the offense coordinator at Oregon but has never been a head coach before. So he's literally learning on the job. And he's learning on the job at a place that had the same message for over 13 years. You know, Mark Stoops had a good run at Kentucky at first and was building into a respectable entity. But his final 2 years, they didn't just fall back to mediocrity. They were abysmal. You know, they were 9-15 in his final 2 years. They got completely blown out and decimated by Louisville twice. Last November, Louisville had a bunch of injuries on the offensive side of the ball, and Kentucky couldn't even score a point. So they've just been trampled by their in-state rival for the past 2 years. They've lost some bad games. They just looked uninspired on the offensive side of the football. Defensively, they were tough, but you know that can only last you for so long. It's going to be real interesting to see how Kentucky is going to look under first-year head coach ever, not first-year coach, first-year head coach in Will Stein. You know, to me, that's what makes them the most polarizing opponent on Florida's schedule. I have them at number 7. 6, Ole Miss. This ranking is based on like Kentucky, it's based on the unpredictability of the opponent. However, in the case of Pete Golding, as opposed to Will Stein, he at least has a few years of familiarity with Ole Miss, being that he was the defensive coordinator there. And, you know, he's being a head coach, but he at least knows the players and knows the program and knows the university and knows the city of Oxford, and they know him. So there is some familiarity there. And he has Trinidad Chambliss coming back, who was the knight in shining armor for the Rebels last year, leading them to a college football semifinal. And, you know, if he had just gotten one more score, he would have beaten Miami, and Ole Miss would have been in the national title game. He's one of the best quarterbacks in the nation, and he's coming back for one more year. Excuse me. So, Ole Miss, I put them at 6. And plus, I think it's right after the Auburn game. So, if Florida is riding high off of a win on the road at Auburn, that could be a trap game for them. But if Ole Miss is coming off of the LSU victory, they could be coming in high, and Florida could be that trap game for them, and it is in the Swamp. I put that game at number 6. At number 5, I put Missouri. The game, Columbia, Missouri has been a horror show for the Gators for quite some time. The Gators are 2-4 on the road at Missouri since they became an SEC opponent. The last 2 losses coming down to the wire. 2021, that was the game that Dan Mullen would be fired. The following day after, that was his last game as the head coach of the Florida Gators. 2023 with Billy Napier, that was the game Graham Mertz suffered a fractured collarbone or hurt his shoulder or something, and he had to leave. And you know, that game was the closest that Florida had to winning a game and becoming bowl eligible that season post Arkansas, and that would have been the biggest road victory of Billy Napier's career by far. Missouri has been one of those teams in the conference that has had a mental chokehold over the Gators. It's tough playing them. It's wacky stuff happens regardless if it's in Columbia or in the Swamp, and it just seems like Florida is usually the more talented team, but Missouri they usually just out tough them. There's no other way to say it. I put that game at number 5. Number 4, Auburn. I believe that this game is the most important road game of the entire season. The entire SEC game of the year for Florida. It's one of the tougher venues in the conference. If you look at how successful Georgia and Alabama have been in this decade, they always seem to win by slight margins when they're on the road at Auburn. Auburn came close to beating Georgia in 2025 and 2023, and the Iron Bowl when it's in Auburn. Auburn has come close to beating Alabama 3 times, yet Alabama somehow keeps finding ways to escape out of there by the skin of their teeth, and it's just not been an easy place to play at, unless you're New Mexico State. But anyways, this is the first time that the Gators will be on the road in Auburn since 2011, so almost an entire generation of Gators will experience an unwelcoming place for the first time. This used to be one of the biggest rivalries in the conference, but they went away from it. And what complicates this game even further is the fact that the current head coach, Alex Golesh, and a lot of his players are the same individuals who upset UF last year when they were on South Florida. So there is definitely they're definitely going to walk in and thinking, oh yeah, we could definitely beat these guys. We did it last year, and we were at a lesser program at USF. We could certainly beat them at Auburn, and we were on the road last year. This time they'll be traveling to see us in a much more raucous environment than USF would be. So that is what makes that game 4th on this list for me. I'll be right back. Okay, excuse me. 3rd, I have Georgia on this list. Georgia. The reason why I have them 3rd on this list, Kirby Smart has dominated the UF-UGA rivalry since his arrival. He's only lost in this game twice, and every time he loses, he usually has a big winning streak in between. Beat Florida and lost to Florida in his first year, and then beat Florida 3 straight years after that. Lost to Florida in 2020, and has not lost to Florida since. He's come close the last 2 years, but oh well. Close doesn't matter. He got the job done, and he wins. For the last couple of seasons, the Dogs have seemingly snatched victory from the jaws of defeat when their backs were against the wall against UF, and seen that no matter how much closer UF got to beating Georgia, the win got further and further and further away. This year Florida is not going to have the advantage of closer travel because the game will be in Atlanta, which is an hour away from Athens, as opposed to having to play the game in Jacksonville, which would be a longer travel for the Bulldogs. They also have Gunnar Stockton coming back. They're returning a bunch of production. They recruit at a great level every single year under Kirby Smart. It's always a tough matchup when UF and UGA have to go at it. Though I will say, I think the mentality for Florida heading into that game will be much tougher than it was under Billy Napier, because John Sumrall is a no-nonsense guy, and John Sumrall is going to have a competitive attitude. Like, no, we're going to try to win every game of the year. We're not going to talk about, learning the process and making sure that the things that lead up to the games are done effectively. Like, no, we're going to try to win. And John Sumrall has been unapologetically competitive, and that's the mindset that UF hasn't had in quite some time. Number 2, Texas. If there is one team that has UF on their grudge list, it's the Texas Longhorns. The last time UF went to Austin, it was a complete shit show. Florida got embarrassed, and it was a game that so many UF fans were practically quitting on the program in its entirety because it was announced that Billy Napier was going to return to the team in 2025. Well, as regretful as that decision was, Billy Napier did get revenge by upsetting Texas and knocking them out of the playoff race. So it's safe to say that Texas may have had this game circled in red for quite some time. They want revenge. Why wouldn't they? And this game will be on the road in Memorial Stadium in Austin. And we've seen Florida struggle in road games over the last several years. I'm going to do a video about that. And Texas also tried to recruit Jaden Ball to transfer from UF to Texas because his former running backs coach Jabbar Jalouk, who had a great relationship with Jaden Ball, he's in Texas now. So there could be a little bit of a like you kind of snubbed us from Texas players to Jaden Ball, and we're gonna see how well that game can, how well Florida can stand up in that game. I have that as the number 2 tough game on UF schedule. And then last but not least, Oklahoma. This will be the first time that the Oklahoma Sooners will ever step on the field in Ben Hill Griffin Stadium. Oklahoma and the Florida Gators have a very short, but it's a rich history. Twice they were on the field, and both times were for major postseason games. In 2009, Florida defeated Oklahoma for the BCS National Championship, and then in the rematch, it was for the 2020 Cotton Bowl, which was the ultimate omen of Damlin's downfall at UF, because once the starters opted out and got benched at halftime, you can clearly see the lack of depth that Florida was having heading into the 2021 season. Now we're heading into the rubber match. Oklahoma is heading into a critical year for Brent Venables. Half of his tenure, he's produced losing records, and he's coming off of a heartbreaking home playoff loss where he was up 17-0. You know, he's accomplished more at Oklahoma than his predecessor Lincoln Riley has at USC. But if you look at Lincoln Riley's his first 4 years at Oklahoma compared to Brent Venables' first 4 years at Oklahoma, granted, a lot of things in college football changed during that time. It's still not comparable that Lincoln Riley has accomplished more in Norman than Brent Venables have. It's not even up for debate. So he's expected to, talking about Brent Venables, is expected to have a much longer run in the postseason at this upcoming season, because for you to come back after choking in the way that you did in that home playoff loss, you've had some bad seasons in your time at Norman, and the standards at Oklahoma are very, 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 very high. And knowing that you're in a much tougher conference in the SEC than you are in the Big 12, which was basically Texas and Oklahoma and everybody else, where in the SEC there's a lot more, big boys to play with. The demand for you to win and win big is going to get higher and higher every year that you're there. And for me, what makes this the toughest game of the year, or at least on paper, is that it's right after the UGA game. As a Florida fan, we have seen multiple times that UGA will beat Florida mentally for several weeks after the game concludes. 2021, Georgia dismantles Florida 42-7. Florida gets blown out by South Carolina the following week, and they almost lose to Samford. 2023, Florida loses to Georgia. Don't win again. They lose the rest of their games afterwards. 2024, Florida loses to Georgia, get blown out by Texas. Last year, Florida loses to Georgia, get blown out by Kentucky. We've seen it time and time again that UGA will not only beat Florida, but then they'll mentally beat them again the following week. That game takes a lot out of UF, and having Oklahoma, even if that game is in the swamp right after UGA, that's a bad timing for that game to come across. So that's my ranking. Campbell 12, Florida Atlantic 11, Florida State 10, Vanderbilt 9, South Carolina 8, Kentucky 7, Ole Miss 6, Missouri 5, Auburn 4, Georgia 3, Texas 2, and Oklahoma 1 as the toughest games on the schedule for Florida. So we'll see where how things play out when the season starts.